Welcome to the pod, you accursed. After a few weeks of tents, cottages, radio gigs, and tender baguettes, I'm goddamn chuffed to say your political panel is back to full strength. I'm David Herle, and with me is Jordan Leichnitz, Kory Teneycke, and Scott Reid. And I'm not the only one who feels that way. I give you the amazing V-Store, direct from Apple Ratings and Reviews ecosystem, who writes, best political podcast anywhere. I listen to international podcasts, but nothing comes close to the remarkable level of cursive politics. When the panel is in full attendance, the balance of perspectives allows the listener to enjoy regardless of political preference. My favorite podcast by far. V-Store, you are a most generous human. We thank you from the bottom of our withered stores of gratitude. All right, here's the show this week. Wildfires continue to rage. The footage is heartbreaking. We'll discuss whether they're altering the politics of climate change. Our cursed clipping is from Alex Ballingall again, writing in the Star on the sour mood within the Liberal caucus. That'll lead nicely into a discussion of the cabinet retreat in Charlottetown this week and the general state of the Liberal government. And then a political mystery for these closing weeks of summer. Whatever happened to Chinese electoral interference? And after that, Gordon Pinson gathers us for our Hey Yous. Scott, Jordan, Kory. Hey, the band is back together. How you doing? Jordan, how is Vermont? How was Vermont? Moonlight in Vermont
was amazing. Yeah, we did a little road trip around Vermont with the kids, and we picked blueberries in the Green Mountains and did a whole bunch of swimming and waterfalls and just very Vermont-y things. I basically wanted to come back with a chicken and a few acres, and that's now my retirement plan, assuming that the climate crisis renders that possible.
Scott, who's this Frenchman with us?
I don't know.
Bonjour.
That's
for those who are listening, you should really tune into the YouTube version this week.
Guido, mon petit cap.
Je m'appelle Kory. Je viens de Saskatchewan. I've used all my French. I am sporting a beret. That's correct. Yeah, I'll take it off now. That's enough of that. But anyway, I'm really liking France. I got to say, I've decided that for my retirement, I'm going to be finding a old Roman villa somewhere in southern France and training a couple of guard dogs, Romulus and Remus, to patrol the perimeter in my absence. And just settle into a life of drinking fine wine and doing not very fucking much. Unfortunately, I have to work, so back to reality in a couple days.
You say you're having a good time, but you didn't watch the Riders beat the Lions last night. They looked
I did
good.
not.
They were fearsome. Yeah.
That may be key to having a good time, actually.
All right, folks. So listen, it's been a harrowing weekend for people in Yellowknife and in the Kelowna region. Tens of thousands of people evacuated in both places. It's been a long summer of these fires. And because this is a political show, because there's lots of things to think about because of those fires, but because this is a political show, I was wondering if there's any political implications from this summer of fires. There's polling evidence that there's rising concern about climate change. There's polling evidence that people are linking the wildfires to climate change. But there's never been any evidence yet, really, that people feel that their own personal behavior is linked to climate change and that there's a willingness to sacrifice to fight climate change. As a consequence of that, Jordan, I have always felt that the affordability crisis was going to trump the climate crisis politically. Is that still true?
Yeah, I absolutely think it is. I wish my answer were different, but I think it is. And the reason for that, I think, goes really down to how people experience climate change as an issue. And in many ways, it's a tough environmental issue, right? Because the cause and the effect are so far apart. And you talk a little bit about personal change and sort of sacrifice in terms of making a difference. And I think the reality is that at this stage of the game, we could all park our cars forevermore, and it won't make a single fucking bit of difference if there aren't major changes in the fossil fuel industry, in how industrial operations globally are happening. So I think that there's a tension between what people have been told, certainly in the early 2000s about individual choice and we can ethically consume our way out of this crisis versus when you look at where emissions are coming from, the reality is that this is a much larger structural problem that is a bit out of people's individual hands. But the affordability crisis, on the other hand, is incredibly direct. It is a pinch people feel every day in their home, in their lives, and so I think it's always going to trump. And actually, I was thinking a lot about this last night, and in a way, the strange debate that we've ended up with in Canada around the carbon tax, where you have the Conservatives railing against, what is essentially kind of a free market solution on climate change, is the meeting of these things, because it's the place where the climate crisis touches, or people feel that it really touches their own economic situation. And so that's what makes it, I think, such a dangerous and such a potent issue, and why it's been such a successful in for the Conservatives. Now, I think my view on this, and I don't have good polling data in Canada to back this up, but there is some research in the US on this, is that one of the issues as well is that a lot of voters, when they're dealing with the climate issue or they're thinking about the climate issue, it's a really hopeless issue, right? People feel, that there's not a lot that they can do. And as I've talked about, that is sort of empirically true. But it's almost like if you get a bag of cookies you really like, and you have two, if you have two cookies, it's easy to put the bag away. And you're like, yeah, it's good. I had two. But if you've eaten half the bag, you're like, well, fuck it. I'm going to eat the rest of the bag, right? And we're sort of in the fuck it stage because there's not a lot of hope. People don't really have a clear sense or a clear vision, or they're not being provided with that about what actually confronting this challenge could look like in a way that brings people together. And so I do think that there is some political space in Canada for that vision, but it's not about kind of just it being doom and gloom and repeating some of those messages that actually we know from a lot of the research really can turn people off and can actually paralyze people into the sense that there's nothing to be done. And when that's actually not at all the case, there's quite a bit to be done, but it needs to be done at the political level.
Kory, what do you think? Do you think that the politics of climate's changing?
I think people are seeing more of a connection. I think you're seeing a lot less climate denialism out there and from all quarters. So I think people are making that connection more directly as a result of wildfires and other things. But I think people are also not going to have this be a huge voting issue. Because I think there is a certain level of sophistication after a couple decades of talking about this that is sometimes not appreciated fully. I'll take issue with carbon tax because I don't think it actually helps. I don't think it actually drives things forward. And I think there are better alternatives out there from governments of every stripe around and countries around the world are taking a much different approach. It would be a free market solution if it led to a direct change that you could actually execute in your life, like say taking transit, but that would require transit in your community, or driving an EV, but it would require EVs and EV infrastructure for you to make that change, or greening your power grid and being able to buy power from a green source. Except you don't, as an individual consumer in our economy, you're not able to make that decision. So you're punishing people for something that they have no alternative in terms of consumer behavior to course correct to. And so all you get is a higher tax bill and the same dirty economy. I think that's one element of it. And I think the other element is that people realize that Canada is like 1% of emissions. And as long as we allow China to generate coal-fired electricity in mass quantities and pollute with abandon under international agreements, things aren't going to get better. So should we throttle our economy to the point of impoverishing ourselves to no avail in terms of the overall outcome in terms of global carbon emissions? So, I think people are concerned about it. Where do I think it leads things? I think there's going to be more talk about mitigation strategies. How do we fireproof communities in the north and other places that are going to be perpetually at risk as a result of climate change. What opportunities do we see in terms of, whether it's the Northwest Passage or, changes in where it's viable to produce agricultural products? I think there's a lot of things that are going to get, affected, and there'll be public policy implications and political implications of those things. But I think it's probably more in that space. I don't think there's a lot of belief, although there's a lot of concern about climate change. I don't think there's a lot of belief that there is a Canadian, retail solution here for, Joe voter or, Joe citizen.
All right, Scott, you're batting cleanup. You're the last opportunity for somebody to find some political light here for the Liberals. Does this in any way put more pressure on Poilievre to have a credible climate plan?
So a couple things. First, on the broader topic, I would just quote the renowned scientist Herle, who said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Science Council, we are fucked." So build a rocket for your children and hope. So just to Jordan's broader point.
Isn't that what Musk's doing? Except instead of going to Earth where it can be Superman, it's like a barren planet called Mars.
The sooner he gets there, the better.
He's not a superhero.
Yeah, exactly. I wish him well. Fly through the asteroid belt in order to stop the Klingons from tracking you, Elon. I also just I know this is pure politics, but because of what I'm about to say, I just want to qualify it by saying these images, right? Today as we tape, Yellowknife, like 15 to 12 kilometers outside of the city is a wildfire with the wind changing. 15 kilometers in wildfire terms is like a blink of an eye. Like that can be on you. So we don't know where this is going. We don't know how devastating and terrifying it's going to be. It's been bad enough, and it just seems like it keeps getting worse. California obviously is on fucking fire. I mean, when I say we're doomed, that is my essential pessimism, right? I am unconvinced that there are solutions here. And so I think there are things we can do to mitigate. I don't know about the science of actually reversing. I am positive that you're right, David, that two things are on witness at present. One, people are associating these fires, these climate disasters, their rapidity and their severity. They're connecting that with public policy, with climate, like they are. And in a way that feels unprompted. Like I was at the cottage yesterday in Marmora and people are talking about it, right? People talk about it spontaneously, right? And they make the connection to climate change and they say things like, well, fuck, I guess that, climate change is going to get us and, this is what happens. And then people veer off. Then they either split off into, and by God, that's why we got to do this and this and this, or they veer off into, and that's why, fill in the blank. That's why, what's it fucking matter if I have to have a paper straw or whatever? Or this argument about, China, which, with all due respect to Kory, drives me crazy. This kind of, this thinking of until everyone does something, I can feel justified in doing nothing. That fucking argument makes me bananas. It's just a citizen. But politically, here's what I think. I think that the carbon tax remains a really problematic piece of the puzzle for the Liberals. I think it is an affordability vulnerability, not a climate change sword. And I think that they're not going to change their position on that. I think it is fundamental to this government, to its DNA. You and I have talked about this off mic recently, David, as you sort of muse about this issue. I think it's inherent to Trudeau, who he is, his sense of legacy, as much as constitutional change was, and the role of French Canadians and Quebecers in Canada was fundamental to his father's view as to why he wanted that chair. I think in climate change is kind of fundamental to how Justin Trudeau views his time in office. And so I don't think they'll retreat on it. And that takes me to my recommendations, which are twofold. They're not too hard. They're pretty simple. One is, are there political implications of it? I think it's very, very tough, but I think they should do more to try to force Poilievre into suffering consequences for this, as it is top of mind, as people do make the connection draw the rest of the line, highlight things that he and his caucus say. Do not let them get away with saying, well, there's no denialists left anymore. Hammer, 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 hammer. Try to make it. At least if you're not going to get rid of the carbon tax, you're going to bear all that risk. At least try to make the other side pay some penalty. Now, you got to navigate that with some skill. If you overclaim, then you'll end up in, turning people off. But I'm not sure that they're actually making him pay a price. And when it's topical and on people's minds like it is now, I'd be finding ways to try to make him pay more severely. Which goes to the broader issue of just doing some paid media on this guy instead of giving him a free ride to let him tell people that he's a lovely family man who's, raised himself up by his bootstraps of his, wingtip shoes that he wore to grade 11 biology. But in any event, the second thing I would say is this, and it's going to sound terribly crass. When the next election is called, I think I'd call it in the summer. Because the gruesome truth is that when you have a campaign in the summer, these fires are going to burn. And these issues are going to be more prevalent and top of mind. So I wouldn't have a February campaign. I would have a July campaign. And I know exactly how ghoulish and manipulative that sounds. But since this is the curse of politics, not the curse of policy, I'll just make that point and shut up.
Well, we would be remiss if we didn't mention also the blazing irony of Poilievre having to cancel his carbon tax tour this week because of the wildfires.
Except what we're saying is that most Canadians don't see that as ironic.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. Right?
Yeah, I think, and I just want to add one thing, and then I'll let Kory, because I know Kory will have have a lot to say here. But I also think and particularly this month, is persuading me that we also are now moving to a place where this is no longer an environmental issue in terms of how Canadians are experiencing it. We're also beginning to experience it as a social issue. And what I mean by that is if you look at what's happening up in Yellowknife, you're seeing the impact of the fires, but you're also seeing the impact of decades of underinvestment in infrastructure, right? There's one road going out of town. Cell service went down. The ministers couldn't talk to each other. Like that's insane, right? And so now you have all of these overlapping crises happening that are really going to accentuate existing social divides and the haves and the have-nots in Canada. And I think that really when I think about the future, what worries me is, yes, the fires and the climate crisis, but also the social upheaval. That's huge. And I think we're really beginning to see that. And so the faster political parties are able to understand the full breadth of those impacts and calibrate for that, I think the better they will do.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about investment these last number of weeks. There's been a theme, Hurly-Burlyites, as there always is, because I love a good overarching theme, specifically how making major investments in technology and innovating to solve some of our most pressing challenges is good for the long-term Canadian economy. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has poured over $240 billion into their world-leading wireless and pure fiber networks since 2000, building the infrastructure, continually innovating and expanding services. But I want to make something clear. TELUS's efforts and investments in better connectivity is only part of the story. Better connectivity is the means, not the end. It makes possible so much of what's important to us. Better connectivity begets better healthcare and health outcomes, a more efficient, sustainable food supply. It reduces our GHG emissions, so we have a hope of meeting our climate targets. And it all adds up to a stronger, more forward-looking Canadian economy. We've talked about these things here before. So here's some new news on the economy via StatsCan's Consumer Price Index, released just last week. We live in inflationary times. I don't need to tell you that. You pump gas and buy groceries. Prices increased by an average of 3.3% year over year in July. But does it surprise you that prices for cellular services decreased by almost 15% year over year and have fallen 33% over the last 3 years? We're going to talk more about all of this, comparing the market forces that promote continued investment, innovation, and competitive pricing in the telecommunications sector with others that will surely stymie it. If that sounds like a tease about some much larger issues on TELUS's mind, Hurly-Burlyites, well, that's exactly what it is. And I'll take you there over the next coming weeks. For now, you can learn more at telus.com/social impact.
I'll chat a bit more about the politics because I do think it's interesting, and I think there's some on the conservative side of the ledger around this. Let's compare and contrast, for instance, what O'Toole did around this issue, and where I think he got it really wrong, and where I think he got the polling and the policy, wrong, and the politics wrong. It comes back to what I was talking about before. Support for the carbon tax is, it's about 40-40. 20. 20 people don't express, an opinion that would lead you to believe that they're ever going to vote around the issue, and about 40% of people, think it's a good thing, and they're basically people who view climate change a little higher in the issue matrix. And then there's 40% that don't support a carbon tax. But when you look at how many people actually think climate change is a big problem,
strong correlation between economic comfort as well, Kory.
Okay,
by the way.
Okay, sure, but also when you look at the percentage of people, including conservative voters and conservative party supporters and donors and others that think climate change is a big deal, they're well beyond supermajorities. You're talking 70 to 80% of people who are saying, including conservatives, that this is a big issue. Where you get a dichotomy is in how you address it. And where I think O'Toole got it wrong is he didn't go the Biden approach. He went the Trudeau approach. He tried to out Trudeau. And why ever, who's ever going to vote for the pretender, the imitator, when the real deal is running right next to you, right? Like it's too close to mirroring Liberal Party policy and approach on this stuff in a way that is dismissive of where your core voters think the appropriate approach is. And so I don't buy any of this stuff of do nothing that you were saying, Scott. Like that's not the conservative approach, and that's not what conservative voters want, either for policy or like in the politics doesn't support that either. It's not do nothing. It's what is it you should you do? Are you going to tax me? And what are you going to do with that money you raise? Or are you going to do something that is more focused on larger industrial emitters and other things? Call that the Biden approach. And I think there is a difference. I think conservatives are much closer to the Biden approach than they are to the Trudeau approach. And so I think where conservative politicians get off, can get wrong-footed on this is to go the O'Toole route. I think the appropriate place is something closer to where Harper was and where I believe Poilievre is, which is to say no to a carbon tax, but also talk about other things that you can do. Now, on this becoming an economic thing, I think if you were to talk to the Ford government or many other governments, they see a lot of opportunities in this, whether it's EV manufacturing or battery manufacturing, and this isn't just to supply the Canadian market. This is to supply a global market. That also means, additional opportunities in mining and things. But, what Jordan talked about and, raised, I think is bang on. If you're going to be developing the Ring of Fire, you better be building an SMR right next to the mine, because if your plan is to run, the mine through transmission lines that go through a forest that's going to burn down every 4 years and cut power to it, that isn't going to work very well. I think it's going to cause a fundamental rethinking about how we do industrial development in the North as well. There's going to be very, very big political and policy implications of all of this stuff. But I don't think it's evil conservatives that are money grubbing, greedy people who don't care about the environment versus this benevolent virtue signaling crowd that say they're going to plant 2 billion trees even though all the forests are on fucking fire. Like it's
I hear you. I'll add two quick things. One, just on that, I don't want to get into an argument, but polling.
That's what we're here to do. We're supposed to argue. Come on, Scott.
But when people say they poll in polls that they're concerned about something, like, I'm concerned about high cholesterol, but am I willing to fucking do anything about it? As I chew back another piece of steak? No. So,
but I think conservatives are. That's where you're
willingness to have somebody else do something. Something to have someone else sacrifice, not me sacrifice.
Well, hold on.
My other point is this. My other point I would say is this. When the Liberals rouse themselves from their slumber and decide that it is time to take a paid media set of boots and put them to Poilievre, and they decide to try to make something of this issue, I hope they don't use it as a chance to say his failure to have a carbon tax tells you that he fails to test, for all the reasons we're talking about. The test on climate, I think, should be more broadly cast. And if they're going to hammer him, the allegation should be the simple fundamental assertion that he isn't serious, he doesn't mean it, he doesn't have a plan, it won't be able to just start branding him that way so that those broad sort of parameters in terms of people's notion of what are and are not Polyev attributes, what are and are not conservative attributes, try to affect them. Because thinking like in this day and age, like holding a 7-minute scrum as a prime minister when people see you and they've got all sorts of views about you and then they hear you on the fourth question say he doesn't have a serious plan, it does not fucking land. It does not get through.
Okay, I just have one last thing to say, and then we can stop talking about climate because I know there's other things on the agenda. But
Jor-El has it right.
Less like we all be seduced by Kory's like clean logical analysis of which I think is very beautiful, but I'm not sure that it reflects where conservatives are actually at. And I'm just thinking here of Frank Graves came out with some numbers from a poll taken at the beginning of August, so pretty recent. Well, things were still on fire, and there's some interesting data in there that shows that the number of conservatives who believe that there's a low connection between the wildfires and climate change is over 55%. And that's a really stark break with other partisan affiliations. So I do think that there is something in that conservative vote base that is really,
that poll
really
showed huge cognitive dissonance still in
that's
the
right.
about this.
Well,
they just can't.
There's still a divide there.
Okay,
there's still a break.
But let's actually do a more nuanced political analysis. In places where conservatives are winning with 70% of the vote, you can have a lot of opinions on a lot of things, and they add up to the square root of sweet fuck all at the end of the day in terms of the politics. What matters is what do conservative voters and potential voters in the 905 and the GVA think, and that is where you see a very different set of data. But Frank Graves, my favorite drunken tweeter, is not always noted for. Not in my view, but I think he's a finger on the scale pollster who, when he puts stuff in the media, it's very much to drive a political point more than it is to actually shine light on a subject in a thoughtful way. Which is what that analysis is, saying, oh well, there's a dichotomy there. Really, Frank is a smart enough guy to know that what I'm saying is true. It is not, if you look at the numbers in places where a conservative government will be elected or not, that is not the takeaway. The takeaway is much closer to what I'm saying.
Scott,
yeah.
One last thing on this. I want to start with you, but I do want to hear from everybody on this.
Well, let's not. Let's just have me.
It's just you. So this conversation always focuses around the carbon tax. And when Trudeau took office, he and Butts and Telford made a really important decision. And that was, there was already a cap and trade system in place with Ontario, Quebec, California, and Washington State. And they could have taken that system and made it the price on pollution system in Canada. But they thought the politics of that was bad, because it might end up being that Canada would be shipping money to California or to some other American state in the way that cap and trade worked. They thought the politics of that were bad, and they preferred the politics of the carbon tax. And I'm interested in Kory because he ran against, obviously, cap and trade, but I don't think it was a very big issue in 2018. I'd be interested to hear what he says about that.
Oh, we ran on cap and trade. Cap taxes, trade Kathleen win. It was a very fucking successful message.
Well, I mean, back to your Harper days, you ran on everything. You guys ran on a carbon tax and cap and trade and do nothing. I mean, you guys boxed the compass on the climate issue, really.
So do you think it ultimately carbon tax was a mistake versus cap and trade, which is pretty invisible to the consumer?
I'm less qualified to speak to it from a policy perspective. I have a point of view on a policy perspective, and a less informed one. From a political perspective, I think it's undeniable. But I've always been a bigger fan of cap and trade because my policy view is ultimately shaped by my political bias. And my political bias is that the best public policy is the one that is most likely to rally a broad enough public consensus that it can be implemented and can persevere. And I've always thought that the carbon tax was going to be difficult to maintain. I think it is of dubious impact. And when it really comes to affecting behavior, by the time it actually affects behavior, it has to be so severe that it's absolutely pick up your pitchfork time. So I would have preferred that. I think to your list, I understand their rationale. Those aren't unimportant considerations at the time. I also think there was a little bit of public policy, climate policy snobbery going on about which way was the right way and when we're going to sort of do what, the conventional wisdom of some types were. I think there was an added political dimension to their thinking at the time, which was not just about shipping dollars out of jurisdiction, but also that it divided the country up. Remember, this is a time when they were still talking about winning in every part of the country, that they were like, we're going to have active campaigns in rural Alberta because that's how you build the party, and kind of that Democratic congressional campaign thesis that they were subscribed to at the time. And one of the consequences of cap and trade as it was constructed in that amalgam was that it appeared in some ways to kind of divide the country. Like Canada and Quebec, if you would, right? The federal government and Quebec were sort of on one clean energy side of cap and trade, meaning that, Alberta, Saskatchewan would be on the other side. And I don't think they like the regionalism of those politics because they're presenting themselves as viable and viable in all places and nation building. So I think there were other dimensions in addition to the one that you weighed. But it's a mistake.
And Leighton and the New Democrats
now.
were running on cap and trade as well. So there had to be some differentiation.
Well, they chose one that fucks all rural voters, which are Liberal voters, and disproportionately rewards urban areas. So, I don't think there's anything that's consensus building about the carbon tax approach. Like, there's never going to be a bus route outside of the yellow school bus for your kids in rural Saskatchewan. Hate to tell you, there's barely a transit operation in major cities in Western Canada, like Regina, for their geography, places like Regina or Saskatoon,
or it's eastern cities. Visit Ottawa.
Well, or
take the O train to nowhere.
Yeah, right. It goes from nowhere to nowhere with no stops in between.
It doesn't go.
Doesn't fucking run.
Doesn't go.
It's the no-go train. Yeah.
I've just been in Regina for a week, Kory, and Regina remains a city where kids ride bikes and poor people ride buses, and everybody else drives their car.
Well, I saw something on the internet the other day that you really made it when you're in a $300,000 vehicle with a driver. Unfortunately for me, it's the bus. But anyway, look, but we're going to get into this. When we start talking about housing, people want to have a middle class lifestyle, and there are things that are reasonable for them to do, and there's things that are impossible for them to do. And there are sort of funny elements of some of this stuff around carbon tax incentives and all of that. The basically the Air Miles plan that O'Toole was pitching, where you could be living on the farm in young Saskatchewan and your fertilizer price doubled, and you're going to have to spend $40,000 more to dry your grain. But guess what?
You
get Canadian Tire money now. It'll be great.
You get a solar powered blender and you get an e-bike that you can ride on the gravel road 20 miles to town. Because God knows everyone wants to have an e-bike out there, especially on a gravel road, especially if you got to go and get groceries 20 miles away. It's just absurdity. It's just I think it's just an absurdly bad policy. Even Scott won't defend it from a policy point of view, and the politics of it, I think, suck ass. Like, they are terrible.
I just want to say two things from the policy perspective to end it. Is I think that for the Liberals, the biggest challenge they have in front of them is inaction and active opposition from the provinces. They're not going to make real progress until they find a way to deal with that. And I think obviously the politics around the carbon tax are driving a lot of that. But for the Conservatives and for Poilievre, he also has a problem with respect to the carbon tax, which is that a lot of companies have bet big on the industrial carbon price. And they have made business decisions that align with those forecasted price increases. And if he were to come in and yank the rug out from underneath that, then he's in the very weird and unenviable position of picking some winners and losers there. And I think that actually is a more significant factor than one might think.
Things to watch. Jonathan Wilkinson is on the Hurly Burly this week, so it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say about some of these things. Our sponsor, CN, would like you to imagine a bakery. a very big, very well-run bakery. This bakery is able to produce and sell 36 million cakes a year. And that's on top of millions of cookies, loaves of bread, scones, croissants, pies, you name it. This bakery is full service. Trouble is, one of its big customers is finicky. He orders millions of cakes, but insists on all sorts of conditions on the orders, and he'll only allow the bakery to load the cakes into his car during sunny weather. Meanwhile, the bakery must also keep producing all the other millions of goodies for all of its other customers. Now, you've probably guessed that the bakery in this little parable is CN itself, and the cakes are Canadian grain. The railway reckons it can move as much as 36 million tons of grain out of Western Canada to market this season, which means it has more than enough capacity to handle its share of the anticipated grain crop. But the multinational grain companies that place shipment orders like to be in charge of shipping. They tend to ignore underutilized eastern ports in favor of overused West Coast ports. Further, the terminals they operate in Vancouver seldom allow grain to be loaded if it's raining, which is often the case during a Vancouver winter. So CN's trains often have to sit idle for days, backing up the entire system. All the while, of course, CN must continue to handle shipments of potash, lumber, automobiles, minerals, manufactured products, and a slew of other items. Because the rest of the economy depends on the railroads too. CN stands by its grain plan. It has the capacity to collect, ship, and unload all the grain it is called upon to move. You know, as long as it isn't raining. The moral of this tale? You can't have your grain, and eat it too. All right, our clipping. Our clipping comes from Alex Banningall of the Star. We've been referring to him a lot. Scott, is he the new Jane Tabor? He seems to have a pretty good network in the Liberal caucus there. Reminds me of the days when there was basically fucking open dialogue on Blackberries in the Liberal caucus between...
Yeah, the Liberal caucus used to basically live tweet out its proceedings. It was amazing.
Exactly. This piece did have a bit of a retro feel to it.
Just to give you a sense, though, what David's making indirect reference to is there was a time when, of course, you would have conference calls, back before Zoom. And so you'd have conference calls and everybody would say, okay, there's going to be a conference call with caucus at such and such a time. And then members of parliament would just say, hey, Jane, here's my code. Or Joan Bryden, here's my code. And then they would sit in on the goddamn caucus conference call and then report about it the next day. And then, run a rail up our ass. I don't think it's fair to call Alex the new Jane. I have a higher regard for his work. But
all right, he had a piece in the Star about growing discontent in the Liberal caucus. Have a listen to what he wrote. Liberals who spoke to the Star in recent days said spirits have dropped within the caucus as the governing party lags in support behind Pierre Poilievre's opposition Conservatives in national polls. Trudeau's major midsummer cabinet shuffle also rattled some Liberal MPs who expressed disappointment and confusion about some of the moves. Speaking to the Star this week, one Liberal MP compared the federal party's situation to the latter days of Ontario's previous Liberal government under Kathleen Wynne. The party was soundly defeated in the 2018 election when it not only lost government but was reduced to just 7 seats at Queen's Park. People are starting to question, do I want to keep taking the beating I'm taking, said the MP, who agreed to speak frankly on the condition that they not be named. I'm just sensing a lot of frustration. Another Liberal source, who also spoke on the condition of anonymity, said the mood in caucus is worse than before Trudeau's cabinet shuffle, which they likened to putting lipstick on a pig. The source questioned whether Trudeau's office cares what the Liberal caucus thinks and said the government needs to stop defining itself so much around the Prime Minister and focus on centrist economic policies. So, I don't know how numerous the disgruntled MPs are. But we're now clearly in a new phase of this government where they talk about it. For years and years and years, there was nothing, radio silence. Now it's emerging. The Libs are in PEI this weekend for a cabinet treat before the House comes back this fall. They're said to be particularly focused on housing policy. Scott, what is the state of the Liberals this week?
Not as not as divided as people might assume. Like I agree with you. This is an interesting shift of gears, right? You are actually now, after 9 years, a period of time being 10 points behind in the polls, a massive shuffle that accomplished nothing and changed zero directions, but sent a clear signal to dozens of people that their future does not lie around the cabinet table. So you're getting some bitching and moaning. But this has everything to do with being behind in the polls. And I don't think it's even remotely comparable to what we lived through in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Just not. And I'm not talking about, I hate it when all the fucking Trudeau guys go on about how they reinvented the party and altered the hyphenated liberals. And there are no Martin liberals and no Turner liberals and no Chrétien liberals and no red liberals and no bluebird liberals and no go fuck yourself in the corner liberals. But like, I hate all that shit. But this is just a taste, just a slight dose of political reality, which for close to a decade, because Trudeau personally resurrected the party from the ashes in 2013, he's had a very, very long life where he hasn't had to deal with that kind of caucus reality. And that could become problematic for him because correspondingly, he's not developed any of those skills. He's not demonstrating any of that interest. You talk to members of parliament that, Trudeau knows them about as well as, they know movie stars. So, that could be problematic for him. But I just don't really think, like, if people are going, well, these are signs of trouble, like there could be caucus quells, there could be challenges, there could be rumblings, they'll pressure the prime minister's office for changes in staff, or they're going to challenge, like, the prime minister himself might find that there's a hand on his back. Fuck no. This is a tiny hint of what every other political prime minister, what every other political leader and prime minister in history has had to deal with. And magically, Trudeau has happily not had to deal with up until this point, and he's getting a tiny dose of it.
Jordan, what do you think of this article, and what do you think of where the Liberals are at as we approach the end of August?
Yeah, I mean, they're not in a great position. I think it's really difficult to overstate how much of a flop the shuffle was in terms of a narrative shift. So I think in that sense, they're in trouble. The polling gap is solidifying, and there's no evidence that they are actually putting forward a strategy that would change anything from what they were doing previously, which is typically the point of any sort of a refresh. On the other hand, I do agree with Scott. I would say, in my experience, caucus complaints like this, even complaints delivered anonymously to the media, is sort of the lowest form of whinging. And there's a really, really big distance between that and the ability of folks in caucus to pull together and organize something that might be genuinely problematic to the leader. Now, I think that if you are in the leader's office and you're seeing this stuff, obviously that's a flag. Obviously that means that you maybe mobilize some resources to tune in and rally folks around and get people pissing outside the tent instead of in. But I don't think it's not really super dangerous. It is notable that it took this long actually to get to this point, because things have been bad for a while. So if anything, I think it probably speaks to the fact that those unnamed MPs know whose coattails they surfed into office. But I do think that
absolutely, they all spent the first term thinking that they owed their careers to Trudeau. So
maybe they in the back of their minds, even though they're scared, they still know that. But I do think that the retreat, so they're hearing from housing experts. They've decided now finally that they'd like to talk about issues facing millennials and Gen Z voters. Great. Very late to the party here. And again, we're still not really seeing any evidence of a shift in narrative from them. And crucially, still no cogent attack on Poilievre, no real marshaled effort to push back on the entire summer that he has spent rebranding effectively unopposed. So I don't think the retreat is necessarily going to provide anything new for them unless they address those two things.
Can I just stick with you for a second?
Yeah.
Somebody wrote something on the Hub. I think it was Ginny Roth wrote something on the Hub that made me think a little bit. And Jordan, I'm particularly interested in your take on why the political right is winning the battle for the working class right now. So that Gen Z vote, those millennials that have deserted Trudeau, middle class now, middle-aged people now, millennials who've deserted Trudeau, have largely gone to Poilievre, not to Singh. Why is that? Why are they leaving the Liberals and not going to Singh, going to Poilievre?
Well, yeah, and I would maybe challenge the assertion because there's a really strong gender divide in those numbers. And I think if you look at where...
Yeah, but the gap between the Conservatives and the two parties among millennials
it's big,
is brutal.
for sure. But we are primarily talking about younger men who are going to the Conservatives. And I think a few things are going on. And this is a challenge that's not unique to Social Democrats in Canada. This is globally at a moment where there should be maximum appeal for these types of ideas. You're seeing the right really reaping the benefits. And I think part of it has to do with the media environment that we're in, where angry populism has avenues to get to people better than it ever has before. And the creation of social media echo chambers really facilitates a lot of that ragey content. And I also think that the right has done, frankly, a better job of reflecting people's feelings about the current economic situation than the left has. And so one of the big challenges ahead of progressives, and I say that broadly, be that Liberals or New Democrats, is to reflect the level of concern that people are feeling in their lives and channel it towards some positive solutions, as they would frame it. And I don't think we've seen that. And this is one of the big critiques, certainly, that many of us here have had, particularly of the Liberals, on housing. When you have a government that is still, for example, after this refresh, going out and saying things like housing is not really a primary federal responsibility, you did not understand the assignment. And until something clicks on that.
It's actually the Prime Minister that said that.
Well, that's it. Exactly. So when your number one spokesperson is out there and that's the message that's being delivered after this refresh, like, you might just be a little bit fucked on this issue. So there isn't a clear sense of urgency and a sense of shared injustice that you have seen folks on the right, not just in Canada, but globally, able to capitalize on. And I do think that confronting that is a challenge that no party on the broadly speaking left here in Canada has yet cracked the nut of.
Kory, why do you think the Conservatives have become the successful class warriors?
Well, because I think they're articulating, especially if you're talking about things like housing, they're not talking about it on a class basis. I wouldn't even say it's class warfare. I think it's about it's where Trudeau was, frankly, in 2015. It's a middle class narrative about saying that you're going to provide the sorts of opportunities and the sorts of outcomes that people have been raised their entire life, and their parents and their parents' parents been raised to expect: home ownership, a reasonable commute, getting to keep at least half of their income at the end of the day, a certain baseline quality of education and healthcare. Like, there are a bunch of things that people sort of have as baseline assumptions, and there are some big gaps that have opened up in between reality and what those baseline expectations are that the Canadians have had for generations. And I think the most acute area you're seeing it right now is in housing in major urban markets. Like, that's where the rubber hits the road for millennials in a big way. A lot of them move downtown into condos, after university or school or college, whatever. Now they're having kids and they want to have a little more space. They want to have a better school. They want to have a different sort of environment to live in. And they're finding it's absolutely fucking impossible, even though they're doing quite well in their career, or they have what in any other iteration of Canada historically would be a good job. It's a good job that does not include the prospect of home ownership. And why they're not going to the NDP, and why I think that the Liberals are about to get themselves fucked on this issue in an even more serious way, is they're talking about building rental housing. Guess what was not a part of that baseline dream? To then go and rent a place in an apartment building somewhere and basically live in social housing, and that, oh, don't worry, we got your back. You get to go live in low income housing somewhere. Like, this is not congruent with what these people want. And so, and then the using verbiage like, injustice and all of that, that's not what they're looking for. They're not looking to be a named and categorized victim group that can join the coalition of the victims that the NDP is operating. They want to be a part of the fucking middle.
Which I have to say, Kory, is a funny analysis, because I would actually say that the narrative of injustice today is coming from Poilievre.
Yeah, but it would never use that verbiage. And it's also why terms like affordable housing and rental housing and all of that is just so far off the mark. Like the artillery is landing in another country. Like it is so far from when you actually talk to and poll people who are in those demographics. It's not what they fucking want.
It's not aspirational, Kory. I mean, rent. Yeah, a lot of people rent, and a lot of people are looking for places to rent, but it's not aspirational.
Yeah, okay, but that's a consequence of a failure of the system, right? Like they're renting in some cases out of necessity, and they're working jobs that if their parents had, or maybe even an older sibling had, they would have been able to get into the housing market and experience something approaching a middle class lifestyle. And they feel like they're being robbed of that, and saying, okay, now you got to just downgrade your expectations. You're going to be a renter, and you are a renter, and you're going to continue to be a renter, and we're going to get more rental housing, so rental prices will go down. They're not looking for lower rents. They're looking for a goddamn house. And that is where I think the NDP is missing it. I think that's why a lot of those voters are landing with the Conservatives. I don't think the analysis is much deeper than that in terms of why millennials are being driven towards conservatism.
So, Scott, you're sitting around in the goddamn PMO and you're looking at this data and you're saying, okay, so we're actually doing reasonably well among seniors, who are the least economically stressed people in the country. The most economically secure feeling people in the country right now are seniors, and we're doing pretty well with them. We're doing pretty well. We're doing okay among young people, the very young. But between 35 and 65, we're just getting the snot beaten out of us. And the corresponding data point is that those people are feeling a rapid decline in their standard of living. Year over year, that age group is saying, I'm worse off in large numbers. And so they're not feeling any economic security. They're feeling a lot of economic uncertainty. What the fuck can they do?
Yeah, it's scary. It is really scary.
A big part of it, by the way, is the Bank of Canada now, right?
Well, for sure. And there's almost nothing they can do about that. And so that's why the first piece in this puzzle is time. That's why the first piece in this puzzle is uncomfortably acknowledging implicitly or explicitly that Jordan and her clan are going to have you by the short ones for a while, because they probably are going to come and ask for some kind of renegotiation or a sweetener to their deal, because the first thing you need is time. The first thing you need is for the cloud of pessimism that's descended upon us all economically to lift slightly. And so that means you don't just need to wait till CPI gets below 3%. You need to wait for it to get below 3% for a long time, so that then knock-on benefits start to be felt, and that the lag effect is dissipated, and that people actually start to have a sense of optimism. So that's one thing you need. You got to buy time. Like, there can't be an election before 2025 or you're cooked. The second thing, I really mean that, by the way. Like, I know people go, no, I think you're cooked. Like, this is a bad fucking diagnosis the doctor's handing you right now when you look out the door as a federal liberal. And then I think the second thing is a classic, and housing, let's just use it as an example. It's a classic problem solution answer, right? Like the construct. You've got to define what the problem is in terms that not only resonate with people, but that then you can do something about, and that you tell people these are the yardsticks that will be moved. And yes, there's political risk in that, but there's graver political risk in saying, I get the problem, and then there's just a bunch of technocratic mumbo jumbo that's sort of pushed out. It doesn't seem to affect anything, and you just glide along, and you hope that at the last minute, if you say that Pierre Poilievre can't be trusted, you'll somehow turn this thing around. So on housing, like, I think they need to be defining in very specific terms what the problem is and what problem they can fix, and roughly by when. And I think there are a couple of things that they could do there. I think they can spur some building. I think that they can create massive incentives, but I think they'll have to do things like that. I think they'll have to be very targeted, highly promoted, massive incentives. It can't be highly technocratic policies, tweaks to, the first time home buyers program. That's not going to do the trick. Now, you might want to have a 7-point plan that includes a number of elements, but you need a couple of things that say, this is why it will be in the interest of builders to build homes that people want, units that people crave, rather than, as an example, saying one of the problems is that we're not building around transit stations enough, and we need to compile greater density. And look, I know you don't want to pay a carbon tax, but you must. I know you don't want to live in a unit that's as large as a carton of milk, but you must, right? Yeah, like they've got to do some things that incentivize builders to build what people are looking for so that people can see that stock, they can make themselves available to it. And then on the other end, make it affordable using financial instruments, right? And, you can do stuff. You can waive housing on the HST on certain kinds of housing. You can take a look at AMS, which, maybe that creates kind of other pressures, but you can say, we're going to move to 30-year AMS. You can say, look, if you're going to greenify what you're building, then because it's part of a new build, then we're willing to relieve some of the terms around whatever mortgage insurance or the terms that lenders buy. We'll pick up some of that mid pipe risk. Like, there are things you can do, but you're going to have to identify it. Problem, solution, put the pins up, knock the pins down.
But nothing the feds do will build a house between now and 2025.
Yeah, nothing will, but there's some things that they can do that'll be movement in the right direction. Things
so they need to be seen, Kory. And guess where I was going is they need to, it's not like they're going to have a result they can show people. They're going to need to have a plan they can convince people of.
But if it's just another Ottawa talk fest where everybody, gets in a circle and jerks each other off, which is, sort of sounds like what the Liberal cabinet meeting is going to be.
Fun as that is.
As fun as that is. And we all
Let's not dismiss that. We're talking about, what was that voter cohort between 30 and 60? I think that has some appeal.
Right.
Circle, church. I don't know. I think that could work, man.
You guys all need a new hobby.
There is a long policy. There's a long policy history of doing this in every party. But look, this is not the time for that, right? Like, if you're going to bring in like the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness and Mike Moffat, like a favorite of the Liberal Inside Ottawa talking head crew, and you're going to talk about turbocharging construction innovation, then good fucking luck to you in terms of your political outcomes. Like, this is not time for all of that Ottawa policy baffle-gab bullshit. But that's what they're essentially projecting as their plan. We're going to take homelessness really seriously by turbocharging our construction innovation agenda. Great, that's good. That is not only going to build zero houses, it's not a plan to build any houses, and it's not a credible political strategy from a comms perspective to have anyone who's a voter who cares about this issue think there's any prospect of you ever building a fucking house.
Great.
But what we do know they will do is they'll continue to allow record levels of immigration with absolutely no plan to support municipalities and provinces in terms of constructing housing and getting the fuck out of the way in terms of greasing the skids around approvals. There's a lot of things they could do on a time limited way. They could waive taxes on new builds. There's all kinds of stuff they could do to incentivize more construction. None of that shit's being talked about.
But I think the first thing that they can do that they haven't done, even beyond the policy fix, which I think we have covered the gamut of. Long story short, it is complex. It is multifaceted. I do think obviously there's a place for all ends of the spectrum in that logical policy fix, but their problem is still primarily a communications problem. As we've talked about before, it's
an outcome problem too.
Sure, but in the immediate, it is a communications problem. I think most Canadians are not even expecting them to fix the issue tomorrow. They are just expecting that the issue receive the attention and the feeling that they are experiencing. And right now, the government is not even meeting that bar. So that is the first hurdle to
I think
cross.
they've got to get people, it's deeper, it's more fundamental. They've got to get people feeling like things are getting better, not getting worse. Everything feels like it's getting worse.
It starts with them getting out of the denial because I think that there's a thought within the government right now that they have done many of the right things and that they are making progress and they have made historic investments and this, that, and the other, and ergo, things are getting better. But the problem is that is not what anybody is feeling. And so they have to break out of that first.
Nobody's feeling that. But when you talk about, okay, we're going to have CMHC come in and talk about how we're going to build 2.5 million more rental units. And then we're going to bring in the guy from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. If I'm a millennial who's actually politically motivated around this issue, it sounds like I'm going to be renting forever on my way to being homeless. Like that's what you're fucking talking to me about. This is on the wrong highway, going the wrong fucking direction from what I want to hear. And on the other side, you've got Poilievre saying we need to build more homes, and I'm going to withhold federal dollars to municipalities that don't start fucking building homes and improving home builds. Guess which one, if you're a millennial who's actually focused on these issues, sounds credible? Which one is talking your language? They're talking the wrong language. Like, I think that Poilievre is going to absolutely kick their ass in this area. And it's more than a communications. It's an outcome problem. But yeah, sure. They're talking about the wrong things and the wrong solutions that are not on target with what those voters are looking for.
I bet they fucking hate our guts. I'm not that anybody in the Prime Minister's office is listening to this, but us just going on and on and on for 20 minutes saying, they're doing this wrong, they have everything wrong. I would fucking hate it if I were them. But I just want to underscore something that Kory just said.
Hated it when Danilo did it.
I sure did. Because, l'ancien regime always knows better, right? Like, it's kind of like, well, in our day, we would just call the reporters in and say, don't print this. I want to underscore something that Kory just said, because I don't know if it's fair. Like, I don't know if the truth is that the federal government's focus coming out of cabinet for housing is concentrated in particular around rental. I don't know if the truth of their focus.
That's what they put in the media.
Just a second. Let me goddamn finish, man. You already said what you hated about what you read. I don't know if it's true. I don't
2
know
weeks in
if
France and the man is rude as shit.
I know. So fucking snooty. But we know most. We know the most.
As opposed to polite and demure Scott.
I just, as French, yes, as French as London. Look, I just think what he's saying though about if the focus is as apparently advertised, but we don't know it. But if the focus of federal government housing policy coming out of cabinet is built around low income, vulnerable populations, if it's built around rental housing, if that's the sum of it, then it's going to be a challenge. And you see aspects of this. It's a version of governmentitis. Okay. And it comes together. And when you look at what's their whole approach to affordability been, because they're in government, they're looking at it and they're going, we need to do something. But then they say, well, we can't do something to intervene so massively to cause relief for the middle class, because that will, if it hits the middle class, by definition, that's a broad enough intervention that it's going to actually continue to create knock-on inflationary impacts. So we will only, therefore, relieve the impacts on those at the lowest end. We'll package that up as smart policy, as moral policy, as heartfelt policy, because we're focusing on those who need it most. The same thing, if their housing policy is guided by the same imperative. I mean, an election is coming. You're trying to win this thing. If you are not singing the song of the middle class, the broad middle class, the people who are indisputably in the middle class, up to 120 grand if you're living in the city of Toronto, beyond dispute, probably higher than that, then you're not doing the right thing. You're not helping yourself. I don't know how much that mentality, which is a product of government, has infected them. I don't know how much the finance minister and finance officials sit at the table and go, whoa. We got to income threshold this stuff. Your activism has to be restricted to this end, to this tiny end of the income scale. Because if so, then you are fucked.
And I think Scott is right on that. And in fact, I'll be the first in line to say that those policies are necessary and correct, and they're absolutely the right thing to do. And they are helping people at the low end. the economic spectrum. But the problem is that when the government packages those as broader based affordability things, they're actually losing credibility. They're harming their credibility with middle class Canadians who hear that and say, well, this made no difference for me. So they look more out of touch. It's worse than nothing in some ways. And I'm not saying that to advocate against the policies, but I'm saying it instead to advocate for a vastly different communication strategy, one that is far more offensive rather than talking about their past achievements.
Yeah.
All right.
If you're going to do it, don't tell me you're doing it for me, because that just makes me angry.
That's right.
Well, that's where they got on wrong-footed on like grocery rebates and where I think they're wrong-footed on the dental stuff. Just screw all of the policy side of this. Just think of this as a political equation, because that's what we're ostensibly here to talk about. From a campaign perspective, as you said, Scott, it's got to be about those voters that inhabit your voter coalition, and they're middle class, and like all the stuff you're doing is missing the target. It's like, yeah, I see you're doing stuff on affordability around food. Just not for me. You're doing something for affordability around dental issues, but not for me. Now you're going to do something on housing, also not for me. And meanwhile, you've got Poilievre, who's basically just shooting pucks in an open net with these voters, because he's the only person who's actually aspiring to do something for them. And
Kory,
you can argue from
you're really hitting on something that's been on my mind for years, which is the demise in this country of universal programs is divisive.
Mm-hmm.
Usually.
Yes. Yeah.
Usually. And it's
universal programs are unifying and targeted
corrosive.
programs are divisive.
That's right.
Of course
it's
they are.
Corrosive. Yes, absolutely.
Of course they are.
All right. I think we have to head to our Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
We don't have time for Chinese interference today, and judging by the pace it's moving on, it doesn't matter. It'll be sitting there next week.
We're kind of like Parliament. We just don't have time for Chinese interference.
Or rather, no one
tomorrow.
is interested in taking on the job.
All right, who's got a Hey You today?
Oh, I got a good one, and touches on China too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Gilbo, let me guess.
I knew this was coming. Kory's
like
being
bouncing in his seat.
I'm so excited. I'm gonna put my fucking foreign influence beret on as I deliver this. Comrade Guilbeault. I'm going to also resurrect one of my favorite terms from the Cold War: useful idiot. Somebody who plays footsie with a communist regime. And is basically a sucker for all their propaganda and bullshit. So at a time when criticism of China and that regime is at a fever pitch, they're meddling in our elections, they're threatening our supply chains around Taiwan. They're imprisoning Uyghurs at a mass scale that we haven't seen since 1940s Germany. There's so much that you could be critical of China about. These are not our friends. These are not people that we cozy up to. Yeah, Guilbeault, trundles off to meet with the China Council for International Cooperation and Environmental Development, the CCICED. I love how communists have the best and longest acronyms. But give me a fucking break. This guy will not go to Western Canada and have a civil conversation with premiers there on issues that are of pressing nature. He will throw bombs at the province of Ontario. He will, snipe at and throw bombs behind the scenes at fellow cabinet ministers in his own government. Yet the only people he seems to want to go on a charm crusade to are the fucking communists in China. How about he just stay there, hang out, don't come back, one-way ticket. Enjoy yourself, enjoy your communist paradise there. We don't need that kind of outreach right now. There's lots of stuff he could be doing here with people here in Canada that would be well worth their time. And I hope you bring that up when you're talking to Wilkinson on the Herle Burley, because he's the opposite. He's somebody who is trying to do that. And I think he's being undermined every single day by Guilbeault.
Maybe we could play the clip of Kory from earlier where he said there's no point in us doing anything on climate change unless we can harness in the Chinese. But anyway.
Yeah. Good luck. Guilbeault is definitely he's gonna charm his way over there and talk them into changing their entire industrial policy. Yeah, good luck.
All right. Who's got another hey you?
I got one.
I have one.
Okay.
Jordan, go.
You go first,
Okay.
Jordan.
Okay. So my hey you is to Jagmeet Singh and the NDP team. It has been a long summer, and it's been a bit of a quiet summer from the leader's office there. And I can hear my friends yelling about the difficulty of punching through in Ottawa media, particularly in the summer. And that is all true. But I did see something last week that I think was good and that there needs to be more of. And that was Singh out there challenging Poilievre to debate on housing. And I really liked that interaction. I think the more that the NDP can squeeze the Liberals out of the housing conversation as much as possible, in terms of focusing on the issues that Canadians are feeling, and just clearly articulate a vision that is more practical for people, and take the fight to Poilievre where the Liberals appear unwilling to, that is good. That is going to help. That is going to provide more visibility for the leader. And that's really what's needed right now, because if things stay as quiet as they were this summer, that is no good. And I think secondary to that is the need to keep the enemies firmly in view. And there was some good work done in the last session on groceries and the CEOs and company collusion around pricing. Stick on that. Pick up what Charlie is doing, going after Poilievre, this guy who's never had a real job, who lives in government subsidized housing with a private cook. Like, do not let this motherfucker be the voice and the vision of affordable homes for Canadians. It is not on. Like eat that for breakfast. And so my hey you is to Singh, to the office, be hungry, go out there with some energy, and bring the fight to the Conservatives while the Liberals are doing whatever the hell they're doing in PEI.
Scott,
Gives me PTSD. You know, people talk about, oh, we went on the summer tour, it wasn't good enough, it didn't get registered, it didn't punch through. And then I'd be sitting there's a commentator going, no, that's not fair. We're like, we got a nice, we're the front page of the Napanee Beaver, and in Tamworth, a man came up and paid for our breakfast. Like, I think we're connecting.
It's pretty hard to argue with any of that advice that Jordan gave, though, don't you think, guys? Like, I think it's every word of that's on mark.
Yeah, I do too. But Jordan.
You got your own hey you, or you just sit there and sulk now?
I'm sorry, I've thrown Scott back into that pre-Labor Day meeting where everyone's shitting on the summer comp strategy.
No, exactly. I just sit in the corner and suck from the flask.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
My hey you is kind of weird, but I never miss an opportunity to be shitty. Hey, Bill Morneau, what the fuck, man? Come on. So here's the thing about Bill Morneau. I think it's almost acknowledged, like, universally at this point, that he is the worst finance minister in a couple generations, right?
Yes.
And the one politically inept.
Come on, surely Oliver's a contender.
I suppose that's true. That's true.
Joe was only there for a short.
If measured by expectations and self-assessment, it's quite an astounding failure. And I just like the whole thing. You know, when he left and the politics and the book and all of that, like there's one thing that I believe in decades we will look back upon, if nothing else, about this time. And that is the astonishing response of the federal government, not just here, but elsewhere, but certainly here as well, right? To say, holy smokes, the pandemic is causing a jeopardy, the likes of which we have not seen in decades, maybe ever, and we need an extraordinary response. We have to pay people to stay at home, and we can't pay them a little like finance wanted in the first design of its wage subsidy. And we're going to have to actually support people. We're going to have to put a ton of fucking money into the economy for people to do nothing. Otherwise, the entire ship will sink. And it was, I think, the greatest public policy accomplishment and the greatest political accomplishment of the Trudeau government, but it may be of any government. Most creative, most nimble, most important thing that somebody has done. It's, exceeds in terms of its scale what was done by the Harper government, for which I also applaud in the face of 2009. It's an extraordinary thing. And Bill Morneau continues to fail to recognize that his association with this is the one goddamn legacy achievement that he can claim. Now, I know that he fought it internally. I know that was the beginning of the bad blood that led to his eventual departure. I know that he didn't get it then around the cabinet table. I know that he suggested something that was smaller, that would do less, that would work not well. But for the love of Christ, he's still out there getting quoted. I guess because he thinks it works when he's sitting around having cocktails with people, at the Bridge Club or whatever. But to shit on the wage subsidies he did in the media, saying that it put too much money into the economy. That's why we have inflation. Well, no kidding. Yes, we have a severe consequence with global inflation. But man, you have to look at the path untraveled. He was wrong. His instincts were wrong then. His instincts were wrong during it. His instincts were wrong after when he wrote that book, and his instincts continue to be wrong. I don't know why I'm paying so much attention to the guy, but it just pisses me off. Like, if you can't see that you should be happy to go down in history associated with this political and public policy response, there is no helping you, buddy.
Well, maybe it's because we won't let him have any credit for the CPP, which he doesn't deserve because he's a freeloader on that one.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
But I got to say something good about Joe Oliver, though, because I'm quite fond of him. First of all, he was there for a short period of time. So, you can't really compare somebody on that basis. And the second is there were no kids on his lawn at all. Like, he spraying them with water. Hey, you kids, get the fuck off my lawn every day. And you should never forget that Gran Turismo sort of element of Joe's approach to politics, which I always found very endearing.
National Post has some bad columnists, but boy, he tops the list.
All right, my hey you goes out to Prime Minister Trudeau. You have no economic story. And, you think about that one line from the Ballingall article where he said, I don't know how many more beatings I want to take, where the MP said, well, extrapolate that to every Liberal in the country, whether it's on social media or at their workplace of work or with their friends or in the bar. They're getting hammered. They're getting hammered every day, and they don't have anything to say. And you have to critically find a way to package up what you're doing, find some new things to do, and create a counter-economic narrative that gets you back into the electoral game. And it won't happen until you do that. So focus on that more than anything else. All right, folks. That's the Curse of Politics for today. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsor, CN Rail. I'd like to thank, of course, all of you who watched and listened today, and a special thanks to Scott and Corey and Jordan for being with us, and it felt good to have the whole team back. So we'll see you all next week again for more Curse of Politics. In the meantime, take care of yourselves.